We all benefit from having multiple tools in our mental health tool belt, but have you ever considered a paintbrush? My next guest is someone who frequently has a paintbrush in hand. He's an internationally acclaimed fine artist whose work has been featured in galleries, album covers, TV, and magazines. He's also someone conscious of the impact of mental health, having grown up with a mother with bipolar disorder. Today, we're going to discuss how creativity can support our being and our well-being. Proud dad of three, Chelsea's husband, introverted and introspective Jay Alders. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Meredith. I'm really excited to have a chat with you.
Yeah, me too. I've been a fan for a long time, and I was so excited when you were also excited to talk about mental health, because I feel like 2020 took our mental health molehills and made them full-fledged mountains.
Yeah, it's been a strange time. I feel like in one way it's unified our emotional mental status, and another way it's almost very fascinating how different it is from one person to the next. Some people I talk to are having the best time of their lives, discovering themselves, rediscovering what their priorities are. Other people have fallen into like a vortex of doom and are apocalyptic. It's very strange, and it really does sort of bring out your most foremost thoughts and subconscious junk that's floating around, I think.
That's so true. It has really, when people say we're all in this together, at first I really liked that phrase, and now I don't, it rubs me the wrong way, because I'm like,
Okay.
No, we're not. Everyone is experiencing a different version of the same reality and handling it in different ways. And I think that's why mental health has been on my personal mind a lot lately, because the more I can have different tools to, like I said, tools in my tool belt, then the better I can handle it. So, and creativity is one that I personally have used in the past especially when feeling extreme emotions, which that might be a good first question is, do you feel like creativity requires some sort of extreme emotion that homeostasis can actually dampen creativity, or do you feel like they can coexist?
I think it's hard to answer that, because it begs the question, what is creativity? For some people, creativity is a hobby, an activity, something to fill up your time. For some people, creativity is a means or a vehicle to express mental, emotional, or physical extreme sensory perceptions that we have. So whether it's pain, whether it's joy. So I guess that depends on how you view creativity itself. I think for me, creativity is something that I've used in both ways, both extremes, when I'm completely inspired and joyous and happy. And I've also used it when I'm completely miserable and depressed. And so in that way, I think it's a habitual practice. So I think that really depends on the person, I suppose.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, and you've been personally creative for a very long time. Do you remember when you first realized it could be a tool for your own mental health?
I don't know when I first made that observation. That was probably an observation that was made consciously when I was in college. But looking back on it retrospectively, I've used it my entire life. I think part of it came down to the fact that I pretty much sucked at everything else. I was not good at team sports. I was not good at sitting in a desk at school, kind of kissing ass to teachers. There was a lot of things that perhaps we are programmed to be like or to do that didn't kind of jive with me. So my default mode was be creative. And that creativity for me expressed itself in art, skateboarding, martial arts, things that I can sort of have agency over myself, as opposed to a referee or a whistle or an authoritative figure. So I've used it as a means of therapy, but I did so not realizing I was doing it. It just was sort of my default mode to, this made me feel better, so I'm going to do it. That makes me feel not so good, so I'm not going to do that. It was more of that sort of a practice, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's funny that you say, though, that you didn't feel good at these other things, because when I feel like you're so good at many things, especially all of the mediums of creativity that you do. But I could see where all of those would be under one category, none of which would fit under the traditional construct of like sit in your desk and do your assignment.
I think about it similar to yoga. So I like you mentioned, I have a lot of different things that I do, some of which I'm average or slightly above average with, but that's a practice. And I think it's important to learn to express yourself in different sorts of ways. And I think I think of it like yoga, right? So with yoga, everyone assumes that everyone in yoga class is like all hippy dippy and super peaceful and zenned out and floating around on like a lotus leaf and just super chill, like just, burning sage all the time. And in reality, most people that I practice yoga with, or most people that I know well enough that do these sorts of Zen awakening type things, are the ones that internally are having the most chaos, the most anarchy in their brain, people that need it the most. So I feel like all the activities and all the different ways that I've chosen to express myself creatively have probably come from a place of like, I need this thing. It helps me. It helps other people, as opposed to maybe someone that's good at baseball just is good at that, or just takes to a certain thing. It wasn't that I necessarily was so much better at art than anyone else. It just made me feel a certain way. I tapped into that. I was aware of that, those feelings that it brought out of me. And I said, I like this. I'm going to keep doing it. And I just stuck with it. And that's sort of how I approach a lot of the things that I do. Yeah.
I think sometimes creativity or art, however creativity expresses itself, whether it's through music or, like you said, even yoga has, an element of creativity to it. Sometimes it's about letting those feelings out. And I can think of times in my life where it's about even escaping feelings. It can be either or. Have your outlets for creativity as they relate to mental health changed in the different seasons of your life? You mentioned college. You have been, married with no kids, now kids. Have they kind of evolved as your life has evolved?
Yeah, I think I have a rather obsessive mind. That's something I've always sort of dealt with. In my younger years, I didn't know how to deal with that energy. And I think it manifested in what could be called like OCD type ways and ritualistic weirdness. And then as I got older, I realized that I can take ownership of these things going on in my software. I think a lot of us take those things that maybe at first we think are negative and we think it's a curse and we're stuck with them. But for me, I realized at some point in my life, okay, my mind's obsessive. Maybe I can redirect that into obsessing over things that are really actually fun or good or contributing in some way. So I've sort of realized that, okay, my algorithm, my software is doing this weird obsessive thing. Let me focus on what I point that at. And so throughout my life, I've had a lot of different phases, I guess you could say, where like I had years where I spent a lot of years doing martial arts or jujitsu. Then I had, which I still have, an obsessive nature with things like surfing or skateboarding or snowboarding. Board sports have always been in the backdrop of my life. But there's been plenty of activities like that, whether it's different sorts of creative mediums, whether it's digital art or painting or drawing or sculpture. And then within those subsects, maybe I would have a phase of painting where I would paint this one particular subject matter, and then I would be bored of that and do another subject matter. So it's sort of like a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. And sometimes the bubble bursts and you discover a new bubble. It's more or less, I find a similarity, whether I'm rock climbing or surfing or painting, there's a similar energy. There's a similar algorithm or software that's running with both problem solving and creativity kind of going on at the same time. And it's not so important what the thing is. It's more important that the energy is expressed properly and given freedom to express.
So it's almost
does that make sense?
I think it does. So you're saying like the relationship between creativity and mental health is not just expression, but also problem solving and giving that energy a direction.
Very much so. And I think that a lot of artists don't fully embrace both the cliche left and right side of your brain, right? I think most artists are admittedly very, very self-analytical, self-critical, overthinkers. Yet most artists that say that would also say, oh, I'm not really good at math or science or organization or whatever, business or marketing. Yet there really is this cohesive tissue between left and right hemispheres, whether you're saying that in a literal sense or whether you're saying that in metaphorical sense of the creative side and the more, organizational analytical side. There needs to be a balance, and each activity you do, whether it's painting or marriage or being a dad or anything, involves both the creating of something from nothing, or the reforming of shapes into something that's different. There's a problem solving, and there's also a making something that wasn't there yesterday sort of aspect to it. And there needs to be both. You can't just create without thinking those thoughts of like, does this work? Does this fit? Is this making any sense? And you can't only create art from the sense of like, I'm going to follow music theory precisely and write a song. Boom, I followed like this chord structure and now it's a hit song. It doesn't work that way. There has to be both.
Right. And I think there's, like you were implying, a yin and a yang and a benefit to both. Like they actually help one another. Because I found that when I procrastinate, for example, which is classic, then I sit down, okay, I have to do this. I have to finish it. And I get really stressed and really anxious about it. But if I step away and do something completely disengaged from that task-oriented mindset, then it's like the right solution or the right idea or the right feeling will find me as I am. Usually it's something with my plants. I even have like plants with me. So I'll be digging in the dirt and then I'll go, oh, that's what I need to do. And then it helps both things. For you, you talked about pretty openly about growing up with your mother having bipolar disorder. Do you feel like that had an impact on your personal awareness of mental health and the intentionality behind staying on top of mental health dynamics in your own life?
I think it would be impossible to grow up in that sort of environment or situation and not have it affect you, right? So, growing up and having my mom hospitalized many times, or having alleged, suicidal behaviors, or being in a rut, I'm doing air quotes here, or a state of depression or manic behavior. Those things affect children, and it's important to sort of break the patterns. And I saw that growing up, like these behaviors, these things my mom is suffering through and still is, are things that probably have been demons that have been floating through my family lineage for generations. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They had a lot of mental junk going on as well. And so growing up, I never wanted to eventually become a dad and pass on these patterns. So it's always been, again, one of the ways I've pointed my obsessiveness is how can I help my mom, and how can I prevent these demons from nurturing themselves and growing inside of me and repeating the behavior that I've seen in my mother growing up. And it also creates a deep sense of empathy and compassion. And for me, it became and still is an obsessive desire to understand everything about the mind-body connection as much as I can, both for my own sake as well as for my children's health and upbringing. I want them to grow up with the tools. You talked about tools in the tool belt. I want them to grow up in a way where they can have self-care practice that works for them and makes the world a little bit better.
Absolutely. So you don't keep those cycles of not taking care of those things that are deeply seated. You can't wave a magic wand, unfortunately. I wish we all could. But you're saying that being able to educate yourself has given you a way to, one of the tools in the tool belt, to not continue that cycle.
I think people do think that you can wave a magic wand. Some people call it alcohol or sex or drugs or social media. People, especially in modern society, we wave this magic wand of like, oh, I'm just going to crack this can of whatever open, or uncork this bottle of whatever, or smoke this whatever, or snort this whatever, or like have sex with whoever, or whatever it might be, something to wave a magic wand and for 10 minutes, or eat this crazy, disgusting meal that's not healthy. People do this wave this metaphorical magic wand because for the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes or hour, you're going to feel amazing. And it works. All those things work. And then it wears off, or you digest it, or it's out of your system, or the person leaves your room, or whatever it might be. And then you're left with more junk, plus the shame, plus the disempowering feelings of, oh, I can't do this on my own. It takes a lot more courage to face and deal with these sorts of demons in a way that doesn't involve a crutch. And so I've been really focused on that, especially since having kids. I'm not coming at this from a preachy way, because I've been guilty of everything that I've mentioned. But it's important to learn to evolve and be a healthy father and a contributor to society without these types of magic wands that you mentioned.
And put in the work, which, yeah.
Yeah, the hard work. The hard work.
3 hearts.
It goes for art too. It's the same with art. People, I talk to so many artists, Meredith, and they're like, oh, I wish I can paint like you, or I wish I can draw like that person. And it's like, oh, really? Let's talk about it. And most people I'll say, well, how long, do you work on your paintings for? And they're like, well, I once worked on a painting for like 2 days straight. I'm like, big fucking whoopee do, really? Like 2 days? Seriously? I'll spend like 2 or 3 months on a painting. Yeah. And that's not to say you have to, but people aren't willing to do the work in any of these categories, like whether it's marriage or a painting or any working out. Like, you got to actually put the effort in. Like, you can't be a wuss and expect to get results,
I love the saying, how you do some things is how you do most things. And that you can recognize your own patterns by bringing awareness to what you're doing right at that moment.
Yes, that's great. I love that quote too.
You have put in a lot of work recently with writing a book, which is a whole new medium of creativity and also a lot of work. How has switching mediums in such a different way taught you about yourself?
I'll tell you the truth. It's been the hardest creative project that I've ever worked on. I've been working on it for about 5 years. It's really kind of almost humorous how it came about. I have 3 children. My daughter is almost 7. My boys are 5.5. So when my boys were born, all my kids were born within 18 months. We had just closed down a gallery that we had opened up, a brick and mortar gallery, severely in debt, not sleeping, all the, imagine having twins and a toddler and trying to function as a human. Was exhausted, depressed, making no money. I have a friend of mine who's a best-selling author, making all this shit tons of money from books. I'm like, maybe I could just write a book and get a few extra bucks in per month. Like, I'll just bang out a book in a month. And so I just started writing. And through the process of writing, I realized that there was a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff that I had to say. At first, I had no idea what I wanted to write about. And as I discovered the lessons and mindsets and strategies and different things I've experienced that I thought would be helpful to other creative people, especially creative people that are sort of have a broken past, I found that looking at some of those things was really hard. And switching mediums was very difficult because with art, with visual arts, it's something that's just like talking. You don't really I don't think about, am I going to conjugate the right verb? And then the next noun when I talk to Meredith in this next sentence, like, how do I do that? Like, it's just painting. And so with writing, it was much different because I really did have to think, like, is this sentence working? Is this paragraph cohesive to the last chapter? What am I trying to say? How do I stick on theme? So I had to learn a whole medium of how to communicate. And it's been really, really, really hard, but I'm really happy that I've went through the process.
Is the book biographical? What is the subject of the book?
Yeah, so the book has memoir aspects to it because the book is coming from my own experiences as an artist, as an artsy weirdo kid. But throughout the stories and chapters of my life as an artist, it all sort of goes back to my creative side. As I talk about various phases and chapters, I also dive into things outside of my life and talk about struggles and obstacles that we all can relate to, how I've dealt with them, how other friends of mine have dealt with them who are creative people, mindsets, lessons, everything basically that I could think of that has been a part of my creative existence, whether personally or professionally, whether it was business or whether it was spiritual, whether it was where do I find inspiration, or how do I get over self-sabotage? These are some of the things that I find the most interesting. It's a book that I've always wanted to read because it tackles all the difficult things that I hadn't yet seen come from a visual artist. I had seen books like Big Magic or Bird by Bird or On Writing by Stephen King, brilliant books, but they were all from writers. And where I can find the crossover lessons to visual arts, there was nothing like that coming from a visual artist. And so it's a book that has memoir aspects, but it's a book that speaks to a fellow artist or creative person in general. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yes, and it makes me want to read the book. It sounds awesome.
Cool.
It sounds awesome. We've talked a little bit on the podcast with other creators about the challenges surrounding making your creative endeavors marketable, which, you grew up, half business person with your dad, I believe, and then obviously having this innate, beautiful, creative spirit, and pairing those two it doesn't appear on the outside to be a struggle for you, but that's one of the things that I hear so much is monetizing their creations is really a struggle. Yeah. And then also how not to hover, to how do you shit or get off the pot when it comes to any sort of one project. And it is torture and overthinking, and just it can go on and on. So I definitely want to know when your book comes out. I'll definitely help share it, because I can think of 3 people off the top of my head who would love those topics you just mentioned.
Thank you. It's been great. I think one of the interesting cathartic observations that I've made from the book is I'm sitting there as a visual artist writing this book about topics that pertain to me as a visual artist. And as I was doing so, I was living this parallel life where I was experiencing those obstacles as a new writer. So I would be writing how to get over like artist block or how to find inspiration. And I'm doing so from the place of being a painter, someone that has a professional art career. But I was doing it through a medium that was forcing me to look straight on to these things. So I was experiencing artist block as a writer while write how to get over it as a painter. It was a lot of like parallel stuff. So it was almost like a conversation between the painter in me and the new writer in me. The writer would be like, well, how do you do this? I'm having such a hard time getting this paragraph to work. And the visual artist would come up with this like Confucius, thing in me. And it was kind of have a conversation almost like between my two different selves. And in the same note, you mentioned like the business aspect. That was definitely something that I've always sort of taken for granted. And I talked a lot about that in the book as well, about how to kind of bridge the gap between the business side and the art side, because to me, they're really not different. Like, you need to be creative to be a good business person. You need to be a good business person and more so a problem solver to be a good artist. It's just we label it as such separate things, but they're really not. It's all connected. I
completely agree. I think creativity is such the underdog of business skills, because you have to have that creativity to problem solve. And really, creativity is also, as you mentioned at the beginning of our chat, it's how you can solve the problems of mental health, is by using creative solutions, expressing your feelings creatively, using different mediums, trying different things. It's also kind of tied to that perseverance of, if one thing doesn't work, try another thing and keep going.
Yeah, it's really, that is a takeaway for sure. If someone that is listening that has some sort of mental challenge, instead of making yourself wrong because you have an obsessive mind or depression or anxiety or any number of a body disorder, any of these types of things, look at how can I use this to my advantage? And there are ways to do that. Maybe the depression that you're feeling is a signal that you need to change your diet. Maybe you need to exercise more. Maybe it's a pain that could motivate you to go to therapy. Like, instead of dwelling on it and living in this muck, like, get off your ass as hard as it is. I'm not saying it's not hard. It's hard. Do the really, really fucking hard work and do what you got to do, and look for a way to kind of reconstruct your software in a way that serves you instead of takes you down, and that's sort of where creativity and analytical thinking sort of can make beauty in the world.
I don't think I could have said that more perfectly. That's amazing, because those people that are listening that are thinking, well, I'm not creative, I'm not artistically inclined, it doesn't matter. With the way you just said that, all that matters is experimenting with new thoughts. And I love how you almost had like two separate Jays when you were writing your book. Like, let me consult artist Jay real quick. And then you're like, artist Jay needs to talk to author Jay real quick. Is musician Jay here today? We need to talk to him real quick. So, but that's going to be such a powerful thing because within yourself, you have the answer.
We all do. That's the thing. People are feel so conflicted, with everything, and it's okay to have these different sides of you. It's okay to have this crazy, silly, lustful party animal inside of you, and it's okay to be a super serious, intellectual nerdo person. Also, it's okay. Like, you don't have to say I am this way, and isn't that like a problem we're having with like the world right now? Society is like this team versus that team. Like, maybe there's things that team has that's admirable. Maybe there's things in this side that could be looked at differently. Like, it's not so, when you say bipolar, it's like the extreme depression, the extreme high energy craziness. And like, everything doesn't have to be so binary and so on off. Sometimes there is gray. Everything's not just black and white, whether we're talking literal in the world right now or whether we're talking metaphorical. And so we all have to like learn to manage the personalities inside of ourselves and the plethora of personalities around us in the world right now. There's a lot of layers to all of this stuff. And it's not doing justice to any of us by wishing we can wave a magic wand and do something to change every person around us. And that's been that magic wand again. That was a great thing you kind of brought into the conversation. I think my mom is still suffering from all these things, and she's relied on medicines and been over medicated, and she's relied on other people saving her, and she's been tortured. And it tortures me how much suffering she has had in her life. And a lot of it comes down to probably wishing there was a magic wand. I wish there was a new medicine. I wish there was a new treatment. Sometimes you have to deal with stuff on your own and figure out a solution that works. And that's not easy to say that. And it's not easy to do that.
No,
just how it is, I guess.
But beautiful things can come out of the hard work. And you've definitely proven that through your beautiful family, your beautiful art. I can't wait to read your book and see how that's been another fruit of your labor. As we wrap up, I would love for you to share how people can see all of your beautiful art and participate in what you have going on.
You're very kind. Thank you. It's been a great talk. I wish we could talk for longer. Yes. So if anyone's interested in checking out my artwork, the easiest way is my website, jayalders.com. I'm also like a social media whore. You could find me on everything: Pinterest, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, probably other ones I'm forgetting at the moment. But if you just look up Jay Alders, Alders on anything, you'll find me. I'd love to hear from you guys. And I appreciate the support, both from you and anyone that's listening that might have interest in seeing what I'm up to. And you mentioned, being a parent. That's definitely my biggest and most profound contribution is my children. My art is great. And my children are old enough now where they think it's funny that they ask like the little mini Google in the kitchen, like who I am. And it goes on Wikipedia and tells them. And my daughter thinks I'm super famous. And I was just telling her yesterday, like I would throw all that out if it meant that, it doesn't mean anything. The art is great. I love my art, but being a dad is like the most important thing. And I would give up everything for them and just to be a dad. So yeah. We all strive for like these titles and these achievements and these accolades, but like none of it freaking matters. It's just be a good person, be a good friend, be a good parent, a good daughter, a good son, whatever it might be, a good neighbor. That matters way more in the world.
Absolutely. It does. Well said. Thank you so much for taking time. I know how busy you are, and it means a ton to me, and I can't wait for my listeners to get to know you more through this chat.
Thank you, Meredith. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. That's a wrap. That was great, Jay. Thank you so much.
Cool.